Apologize.
Hey, Raj. Okay, so we're going to start today with Galatians chapter 4. There's some topics here that we're going to be dealing with or inheritance rights. We're going to look at the slave being in slavery versus freedom. We're going to look at Hagar and Sarah. Verses 21 through 31 are pretty straightforward, but there is some complicated theology into it. We're gonna have to work some stuff out, but let's get started. And Mom, will you kick off by reading verse 1 through 7?
Now, and I'm doing in the New American Standard. Now I say, as long as the heir is a child, he does not differ at all from a slave, although he is owner of everything. But he is under guardians and managers until the date set by the father. So also we, while we were children, were held in bondage under the elementary things of the world. But when the fullness of time came, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, in order that he might redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent forth the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. You said to 9, right?
Yeah, it's just 10 to 7.
Okay, therefore you are no longer slaves, but a son. But if a son, then an heir through God.
All right, so a couple things, and we spoke a little bit about this back in a few weeks ago, where in the Roman world, you know, about 2 to 5% of the population had wealth, and they basically kept the Roman society alive, and they did it a lot through adoption. So here's an example. In Roman law, you could actually adopt a grown person who's 21 years or older. And you could do that specifically if you didn't have an heir. So kind of like Abraham could have adopted Eleazar to be his heir, and he would have inherited all the rights if Isaac or Ishmael had never been born. So in Abraham's time, that was common. And then in the time of the Romans, it's very common, especially to do this. And here's an example. Augustus Caesar was not a Caesar, right? But he was adopted into the Caesar house as a grown adult. And so here, not only did he receive all the benefactor of the Roman Empire, he became an emperor himself, right? So this idea of adopting somebody into a household is a known concept to the Galatians, okay?
Moses was adopted as well.
Yes, that is an example too. He would. So in this case, there's another additional thing that came out of the Greek world where they would provide a tutor, and we see this with Aristotle and Plato and some of these would be tutors to some of the wealthy people, and they would hire them, and basically they'd be under the tutorship of that person till they came grown enough where they would be released to be in their own into the inheritance of the family. Go ahead, Tyler.
Is that the Greek word pedagogue or pedagogue?
Yes. Yeah.
So that's in essence in verse 2, the guardians and managers that are essentially the pedagogues who are in control of the son until the date set by the father.
Yeah.
But isn't that also the term used, I guess, by Paul in for the law, that the law is essentially our pedagogue or pedagogue?
Yeah, and he's going to draw this here. He's starting to draw that same comparison, right? So Moses was your tutor. You were adopted at Mount Sinai. You became adopted, and you became his children at Mount Sinai. And Moses was your tutor, and all through the through Torah, they're called the children of Israel, right? So they're never called the adults of Israel or the adults of God. So they're all considered still under the tutorship of Moses, right? So now let's pivot a little bit, Lori, to our prior conversation about what this rabbi and other rabbis and many teach, that you can join us, but you can't be part of us, okay? So this is a clear violation. What he's speaking is a clear violation of Torah, specifically Galatians, is that when you've accepted Messiah and you walk in faith, you received salvation, and you now are adopted into the family of God. It clearly says, and because you are now sons, God has sent the spirit of his son into the hearts, crying out, Abba, Father. So you're no longer a slave, but a son. So being a son means that a son must apply or must live by the rules of the house. Okay. The rules by the house were set forth in Torah, right? Those are the rules of the house, and that's where the appointed times were laid out. The rules of the house were not laid out in Romans or Corinthians or in Galatians. They were back in Torah. And so that's what they would study. And that's what this church, this congregation would study, is the rules of the house from Torah. So that rabbi who allows you to come in and join them, when you're attaching to them, you're sojourning. So the rules of the house is the appointed times. So if you said to the rabbi, well, you have Hillel 2 calendar, and as far as I'm concerned, there's no witnesses and it violates scripture, I don't want to live by your appointed time. I'm going to find out somebody who's doing this and set their own and adopt their own calendar, and I'm going to follow him. What would the father of that house, rabbi, say to you if you were observing a different Seder or different Passover? He would ask you to leave because you'd be stirring up rebellion in that house. You follow me?
Isn't that what essentially Jeroboam did as well?
Yeah.
He said, I got this. And isn't that essentially with the golden calf as well? We got this.
Yeah. Yeah. And in both cases, you got the house of Israel committing the sin, the 10 tribes, which is in essence why Judah is so leery and so fearful of allowing people to come in and change things, because the accusation that Ezekiel clearly lays out, it was very elite, wealthy, rich people who had left the northern kingdom, who had come into Jerusalem, who began to dictate the terms and how the Levites and the priests were supposed to operate. Eventually they brought in their own golden calves. And so that caused, the complete diaspora of everybody. So from their perspective, they don't want Hellenization taking place, but at the same time, you either are adopted or you're not adopted, right? God is either your father or you belong to somebody else, right? And that's really the cleanest way to say this. And it may be difficult to have a conversation with somebody in his position because he's stuck in his ways, but you need to know for yourself where you belong and who you belong to.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the important thing. Right.
All right. So let's talk about you no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, they're heir through God. So in context, in the Greek world, in the Roman Greek world, there was, probably about 30 to 40% of the population was a slave or indentured to somebody. Okay. The merchant class, the middle class really didn't exist in the imperial Rome or imperial Parthia. Parthia, which is on the other side of the Euphrates, had a feudal system, where Rome had a different type of system. But in both cases, there was not really a middle class. Okay. So the poor would basically indenture themselves or adopt themselves or be part of a household of somebody who could take care of, be their benefactor. Okay. And this is very common throughout the whole Roman world. Perfect example would be Luke. Good chance that Luke was probably from a priestly family living in a Roman province who had to be indentured. If he was a doctor, in many cases, doctors were adopted or taken in as a slave to serve that household. And so that's where he would have understood many of the language of the Roman world because of that. But this is a very common thing in that time frame. Today, since we have such a large middle class, it's hard to kind of see that clearly.
I got a question. I've been wondering if indenturedness or slavery, and especially in the context of Hebrew slavery, which every Shemitah year, every 7th year, you are set free, essentially. That and I don't know if this is a Roman thing as well. Is that equivalent to a mortgage? Because the borrower is slave to the lender. Would people indenture themselves in essence to to pay for a piece of property or land or a home or things like that. So you're essentially, to get a mortgage, you have to have a job. And so you're essentially working for the bank, because they're not going to give you the money unless they know that you have a means to pay them back.
Right.
I'm wondering if that's the analogy for slavery in Rome.
So in Israel, in most cases, it was more applicable, that concept. But in the Roman world, because of wars, constant wars and fighting, and taking over states and bankruptcies and all kinds of immoral living, a lot of people lost their freedom because of either war or because the immoral lives of their families. We see this happen a lot in Thailand and China and a lot of Asian nations, where fathers will have gambling habits and they'll turn their daughters over, and those daughters become their payoff for their freedom to get out of their debts. And so that was probably a lot more common in the Roman world, because it didn't believe in setting somebody free. There was, you've seen, was it in Ben-Hur? You guys seen that movie where they're all in the galley of the ship, they're all chained in, they're all slaves, right? They're all going down with the ship. There's nothing you can do about it. They've been bought and paid for, and they're owned, and they'll die with that ship. And so that's kind of the Roman world. It was vicious, it was ugly, and there was no freedom. So what Paul is speaking to them is revolutionary in a lot of ways, because he's saying that when God adopts you, you're no longer a slave. You have the same access to this king as somebody who's free, or somebody who's rich, or somebody who's powerful. You all have the same access. And so this is kind of a revolutionary thought. And so for many of these people culturally, they flocked to it because it was something that was appealing, because they knew that Apollo and Athena and Venus and Mars, they would enslave you, right? Those gods did not give you freedom. So, all right. Any questions?
So
okay.
I've got another question with like verse 3. In the same way that when we were children, were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. Taken literally, that could mean, for my upbringing, the idea of before accountability, a true child is under grace. And so until they are of age, I guess, at 12 or 13, then morally, if they were to die before they come of age morally, then they would be under grace. But I think this seems to be in the same way we were also, when we were children, we were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. I would think that to be the period after true childhood, like 12 or 13, until we come to salvific faith in Yeshua, at which point then we become adopted. Is that how you read that? Or
So I don't know if Paul is using this understanding of, because he's going to tie in Hagar and Isaac later. I don't know. See, when they were in Egypt, they were slaves, right? And then when they crossed out of the Red Sea, they were born again, they became free. But God still had to give them a tutor because they were children. He gave them Moses, right? And until Messiah come, they were still under that tutorship of Moses. So they're still being guided and guided through life until Yeshua came. And then through Yeshua, they had complete freedom. Like if you're still in somebody's house, you're still under your dad's rules, right? And so when you become a grown man, you leave and start your own career, you're free of a little bit of free of that. But in this case, I think it's really a reference to that. It's that progress that Israel is making through time. I could be wrong. Somebody else may have,
Yeah. And Robert, in verse 4, my translation said the fullness of time, but the complete Jewish Bible says at the appointed time. So we're talking about this again, the idea God has appointed times. He knew exactly the time that Jesus was to be on earth to fulfill his purposes.
Yeah. So it may be just the natural progression from slavery under Egypt, coming out, being free, being under the tutorship of Moses, and then when Yeshua came, then they would become, they would be in relationship, adopted, co-heirs. There'd be that co-heirs, which he refers to, I think, in Ephesians. It doesn't disregard what you said, Tyler. I don't think so at all. But I don't know. I think in this case, if I'm Paul, is he trying to keep things along a calendar understanding of, because he's using this tutorship of Moses. So I don't know. That you could be right. All right, let's go to verse 8. Paul, can you read 8, 9, 10, and 11?
But at that time, when you did not know God, you served those who by nature are not gods at all. But now you have come to know God, or rather you have come to be known by God. So how can you turn back again to those weak and worthless principles? Do you want to be enslaved to them all over again? You observe days, months, and seasons, and years. I fear for you that perhaps I have labored over you in vain.
Yeah, I think this is it. This is what this. You're worshiping Mars, Venus, Apollo. They had their appointed times. You were slaves to that. You've been brought out of that. You've got the true gospel. And do you want to go back to those elementary principles? To what it says there, formerly when you did not know God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not gods. What's he referring to? The demons they were worshiping in Apollo, Athena, etc. All that garbage, right?
So it's obviously not talking about the appointed times of God in scripture. He's talking to new converts out of their worship of pagan gods and their seasons.
Yes.
So we twist it to say the other, we're totally making it not in accord with what scripture says.
That's what I see it. That's how I read. I don't know. Anybody else had another way of looking at it? Because clearly when he said, when you do not know God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not gods. That's a clear reference to the Baals, the worshiping those false gods.
There's no Jewish person then or now that would identify with that statement.
Yeah, it's
They
sad.
felt like they were under God.
Well, look at okay, so we've talked about, we're coming up on Passover, right? There's statements all through scripture about the house of Israel that they had already were worshiping the Egyptian gods. They had become enslaved to Egypt, not just physically, they were enslaved to the gods of Egypt. They had made threshold covenants with them. They had began to follow those appointed times in Egypt. Yeah, but and culturally they were Hebrews, right? Kind of like today. They were Hebrews and they stayed together as a Hebrew people, but they had been so influenced by the Egyptian world that they were no longer keeping the appointed times of God, if they ever did. So there's a clear, I think this is clear. What happened in Egypt is clearly what happened to the 10 tribes here in Galatia. These Galatians clearly had fallen into the trap, and it had been how many years? Over 700 years since they had been gone into exile. So the sad part about it is they've been doing it a long, long time. This was not something new. And Alexander?
Yeah.
Were you going to say something?
Oh, sorry. No, forget it.
Okay.
It
guys,
does seem like
go ahead.
the context, though, he's talking to these people about don't go be circumcised and don't join these people who are like Judaizers. So it just seems like in context, he's talking about not going back to that.
Well, I haven't seen him in chapter 4 deal with that yet. And the reason why, I mean, Laura, because he gets into the Hagar Sarah thing here in a minute. And so this is a lot of this stuff is dealing with the nations in this chapter. Now, in the beginning, he had to deal with these people that were stirring stuff up, but now his conversation is turning to, because just like in Corinth and Thessalonica and some of these other congregations, they were basically doing what's happened during the time of Elijah. They were straddling the fence. They worshiped Baal and Yehovah. What is that figurine there?
Oh, that's Michael Allen. So
Okay.
Hi, Michael. You've
Sorry,
joined
I'm out
us
and
now
about.
at a good time. Yeah, we're on verse 8. Good to see your face again. He's
Thank
my
you.
friend from Torah Club.
Hey, Michael, how you doing?
Hey, I'm just gonna be listening in. That was an
Okay.
icon of the resurrection, by the way.
Okay, all right. All right, so who's next? All right, Lori, can you read? Are you able to read?
Yep.
Okay, you got the
What do you
long
want me to
one,
read?
12 through 20.
Okay. And this is the complete Jewish Bible. So I
Okay,
don't know. We'll see how this goes. All right, brothers, I beg of you, put yourselves in my place. After all, I put myself in your place. It isn't that you have done me any wrong. You know that it was because I was ill that I proclaimed the good news to you at first. And even though my physical condition, must have tempted you to treat me with scorn, you did not display any sign of disdain or disgust. No, you welcomed me as if I had been an angel of God, as if I had been the Messiah, Yeshua himself. So what has become of the joy you felt? For I bear you witness that had it been possible, you would have gouged out your eyes and given them to me. Have I now become your enemy because I tell you the truth? True, these teachers are zealous for you, but their motives are not good. They want to separate you from us so that you will become zealous for them. To be zealous is good, provided always that the cause is good. Indeed, whether I am present with you or not, my dear children, I am suffering the pains of giving birth to you all over again. And this will go on until the Messiah takes shape in you. I wish I could be present with you now and change my tone of voice. I don't know what to do with you.
all right, let's quickly, Lori, can you turn to Acts chapter 16, verse 6?
Okay. Acts
Sounds like he's
16
going
verse
back here and
6.
talking
Okay.
to brethren.
Yeah, Acts 16, verse 6. Go ahead and read that.
Okay. They traveled through the region of Phrygia and Galatia because they had been prevented by the Ruach HaKodesh from speaking the message in the province of Asia. When they came to the frontier of Mysia, they tried to go into Bithynia, but the spirit of Yeshua would not let them. So
Stop
after
right there.
passing by Mysia, they came down to Troas.
Okay, so let's stop right there. All right,
Their
so
vision.
let's stop right there, Lori. So let's kind of outline what, remember we talked
hang
about
on. I gotta get my
Phrygia
dog.
and
Uh-oh. Blue. Sorry.
Blue is a dog, by the way.
yeah, it sounded like he was reading scripture.
My dog is chasing after our guest's dog.
So there was clear lines defined where they went. So Peter and the rest of the apostles crossed over the Euphrates River and went into Parthia, and they were preaching the gospel to the 10 tribes and primarily to people of the dispersion. Okay, that was their primary mission. Where Paul and Silas and Barnabas were sent in a different direction. And we see here in Acts chapter 16 that there was a clear effort by Yeshua to keep those lines separate. Okay, so each one had different missions to accomplish. Now, from what I understand from Galatia, Paul gets very sick, and on one of his mission trips, because of sickness, he reaches out and goes into Galatia and begins. And while he was there in person, they took care of him and they showed him compassion. A man they didn't know, only by reputation and what he was doing in the Roman provinces did they accept him. And then he was able to bring a true gospel to the Galatian congregations. They accepted, they showed love and a lot of kindness. So when Paul leaves, okay, this is when in many of these congregations, the people from this synagogue party, the circumcision party, were coming into the synagogues, right? And they were preaching what we have been talking about the last few weeks, a incorrect salvation concept. Okay, so Paul is not he's not in Galatia, but he begins getting feedback that there's chaos going on in these congregations. So he writes this letter here, and he's not in person, he's not there, but he writes it because he knows what's going on and he's trying to correct it. And so one of the things as you see, right, as you read, is this, and though you know my condition was a trial to you, You did not scorn or despise me, but received me as an angel of God, as the Messiah Yeshua would do. So in that statement, he says, you didn't know me, but you treated me with great kindness, and you allowed me into your house, even though it might have been a burden to them, whatever sickness he had at the time. So, but then he says, for I testified to you that if possible, you would have you gouged out your eyes and given them to me. In other words, you would have gone through anything to help me out. And that showed your true heart, your true nature. And he's praising them for that. But then he's going to flip it around and said, now, but something's happened to you. In the beginning, a few chapters ago, he says, you've been bewitched. You've been lied to. And so that bewitching has happened in many ways. So I'll give you a personal testimony of stuff that I saw happen with us. I've been keeping and observing Torah since 2004. Okay. And I moved to Houston, and I attached myself to a congregation called Calvary Christian Fellowship in North Houston. The pastor there he was the leader, and he was trying to teach the congregation Torah, and he's trying to teach them about the appointed times. And there was a split in the church, not physically where they just left. There was a split where some people wanted nothing to hear about or nothing to do with it, and other people really were heavily into it. But over time, a couple rabbis, and one of them, which I think has a really great heart, were able to influence him, and he renounced Yeshua. Okay. And when he renounced the pastor, and when he renounced Yeshua and he left, he took a bunch of people with him, right? There was a day, and I'll never forget this, was a young kid who was a son of one of the people that were studying Torah under Rod, came to him from a college out in California, and he said, he spoke through the Spirit. He says, you are a false prophet, right? You're lying, bewitching these people, right? Because in his teaching of Torah, he refused to mention Yeshua's name. He refused to point to the shadows of Messiah. He didn't want to. He wanted to delineate a line. And I remember as this process was going on, that it created great confusion. Finally, this pastor was cast out, and he took a bunch of people with him. I'm talking a lot of people with him. And some people said, well, I'm just going to go because I want to continue studying Torah because I'm really learning a lot. Okay, but see, here's a problem. Once the Spirit of God has left somebody and they do not believe that Yeshua is the Son of God and the Messiah, once you attach yourself to him, that spirit will attach to you. So what I found out is about half those people left and do nothing today. Okay. Half of them went back in the world. Some of them completely rejected Messiah. And some people went back into the ways of the church, right? There was so much confusion, complete confusion, okay? So I would liken these people of the circumcision party to that. You come in here and you bewitch and you confuse, and some people are going to go back into paganism. Some people are going to go back under these things of the law that are entrapping you, what he's talking about. And some people are so confused and say, I'm just going to walk away from everything. And so Paul is dealing with, there's a giant quandary in this Galatian church. It's because you have false prophets. You have basically people that are confusing them, really running roughshod over them. And he's doing this letter. This is only by a letter he's trying to, we don't know the end result of this. I will tell you what I think the end result was, in my opinion. What ended up happening with the Galatians and the Phrygians 100, 150 years later is they believe that Yeshua was Messiah, but they don't believe he was divine. And in the 400s and 450s, they migrated into Europe, not believing in the divinity of the Messiah. That was the end result of what you can't see in this letter. So there's a big danger. That's huge. I mean, you confuse people enough, you can get them completely away from Yeshua not believing his divine presence. And so I think that's part of what's going on here and he's talking about. Laura, did you pick up any of this at all? Did she chase in blue right now?
I'm back.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah,
Sorry, I yelled on the recording. He's leashed to the
got him.
house.
We have Airbnb guests this weekend at the tiny house, and so he was being a bad dog. So,
That's awesome.
They went out to walk their dog and Blue went up there and chased him and they ran into the house with their dog. Oh, that's funny.
Lori, read verse 19 again.
Where? Which one are we in? Galatians?
Galatians 4:19.
Galatians.
Read that verse again.
Okay, 4:19. My dear children, I'm suffering the you all over again, and this will go on until the Messiah takes shape in you. That one?
Yeah, my little children. Okay, so why would he call them my little children?
Well, he says here, I'm in labor. So they're new Christians, I would say. They're just beginning their walk, and here somebody comes in and upsets them before they're really matured in the Lord, have their
Yeah.
roots down.
Yeah, and so what I found out with this pastor, nobody went back into being pagans, right? But what they did go into is confusion. Okay. So confusion is worse sometimes than just going back to where you used to be. Because back to where you used to be, at least you know there's a starting point and a place you can go back to. But with somebody who's confused, they freeze. I know this in my career. Anytime I've dealt with somebody who's frozen out of fear, I can't get them to do anything, right? They're done. And so if you're confused, you're not gonna, even the prodding, you'll quench the Holy Spirit. You won't let the Spirit talk to you. And so I think in this case, he's got his word. That's why he says, my children, he's trying to extol them as children. Hey, let's go back to the basics. Let's get back to where we were. I wish I could be present with you now and change my tone, for I'm perplexed by you. So this must have been pretty much a mess.
Well, and he said it's in pain too, because here they translated it, I'm again in labor. I mean,
Yeah.
that's women describe that there's no pain like that. So he was really truly burdened and in pain over, and if you're a missionary or like what we've seen in Paraguay all these years, it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So you can feel his pain. How can I reach these people? And yeah.
Okay, so let's get into the hard part. You guys ready?
well, there is
The hard part still ahead of us.
there's something really interesting in that verse 19, though, until Christ is formed in you. And the idea of Christ being formed in us is really interesting, that there is this point at which we are immature, we are children until Christ is formed in us. And I think that there's an element of sanctification. I mean, at what point is Christ formed in you? How do you know you're no longer a child? And when am I a boy and a man? And when am I when will I be beyond this little child phase that Paul says? And that how do I know that Christ is formed in you? And I think by the Spirit Christ is formed in us. But it brings into question this whole idea of spiritual formation that people are that Reformed theologians are so against right now, it seems like.
What is explain that, because I'm not familiar with that.
Well, there seems to be this there is a movement of, or people that talk about spiritual formation, and I think that perhaps it's maybe an idea that comes out of Catholicism, or maybe it's I know that Dallas Willard has talked about spiritual formation, but here is this Christ formed in you. And how is Christ formed in a person? And I think making a disciple of someone and teaching them to obey all that he's commanded them, what does that look like? And to me, there's just like a whole library of questions, in that Christ formed in you, because it goes back to me thinking about that question in Colossians 1 that says, the secret that has been kept from mankind until now, and that is Christ in you, the hope of glory. What is it? I was just looking that up.
Oh, this Tyler, let's try this. So Socrates, because he's dealing with a Greek Hellenized world in a lot of ways, right? Socrates was a teacher of Plato, right? And Plato was a teacher of Aristotle. All of them came into their own right at some point in their lives, right? But Socrates taught Plato until he was free to become his own person and have his own ideas and concepts, right? But he is still a student. He was still a student of Socrates, right? So if we're passing from Moses as our tutor to Messiah, so when do we become fully grown and model the Messiah? When he's taken completely control of the tutorship of us in our lives, right? And I think that may be, if he's talking to a Greek-minded world, right, a way of thinking, then maybe it's that passing on the baton where you're fully mature and you can now stand up and you can speak for the one who taught you. Okay. And maybe that's a context of what he's saying. I'm not sure. Maybe you guys can have a different opinion on that. Did I throw you off? Tyler? Are you
No, I
certain?
think that was really good, Robert, because
Yeah, I do too.
back to the comparison of Judaism, now that was like their teacher, now they're going to move out from under the law into that the law is inside them, not that it's removed, but it's a part of them rather than something outside of them.
So one of the things we did today in this Torah portion, as we taught was when you start studying about, the menorah and the table showbread and the Ark of the Covenant, we can get into all the details and the facts and stuff like that. And you can, you figure out the square root of this and the measurements, and you can get lost in that. And you do not understand the purpose behind what's being taught. So when we start breaking down the menorah and you start really getting into it, there's so many types and shadows of Messiah in it, and talk about the Shamash, and then you got to look into a lot of the traditions and things that happen. So one of the things is, for example, is in the menorah, you had 3 branches going to the left, 3 to the right, and then you had a center branch, and that was called the Shamash, or the servant branch. And so in Zechariah, as we studied, last month, it said, I'm sending my branch, the branch, right? So what was he referenced to? And I began to think of this for a while. The branch that he's sending is that servant. That servant he was the one he was sending, right? So anyway, to get to my point, at the end of the day, you would take that servant branch and you would light that menorah, okay? And then once it's lit, you take the fire from the servant branch and you would start to the right, and the 3 to the right, and then the 3, and then you go all from right to left, and you write the other 3. And from the time of Aaron all the way until the time of the death of Messiah and his resurrection, that servant candle, that middle branch, would stay lit even into the next day. It had plenty of oil. The other 6 would drain out, but that middle one always had it. And after the death of Messiah, what happens is when the priest would go in there to start it and light the menorah at the end of the day, in the evening, he would start lighting it. He had to add, from the first time, the next 40 years, he had to add oil to that servant branch. It no longer stay lit. Okay, this is huge. All right, now when we study the menorah and the size and the almonds and the flowers and the calyxes and all that stuff, you miss, what does Messiah mean in this menorah and how does it mean to us, right? Point of it is what has been lost in studying the Torah is you can get the facts, but the facts don't tell you the real living story that's in the menorah and how it applies to you, and how that servant branch is that fire, that eternal fire that'll stay lit in you forever and ever. And that's what we're waiting on. See, and so you have to start making these connections. You can have the tutor in the beginning, but he'll never be completely able to teach you about the real living part of the law, make it come to life. And I think that's when the full picture comes into view. So that was a tangent big time, guys, but it does tell you how to take something and give it meaning all the way into the message of Messiah in the Torah. All right, let's get in the fun part. Alexandra, can you read verse 21 through 27?
Yes, hold on one second. All right, 21 through 27. Tell me who you desire to be under the law. Do you not listen to the law? For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, one by a slave woman and one by a free woman. But the son, my battery is almost dead. But the son of the slave was born according to the flesh, while the son of the free woman was born through promise. Now, this may be interpreted allegorically. These women are 2 covenants. One is from Mount Sinai, bearing children for slavery. She is Hagar. Now, Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. She corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free, and she is our mother. For it is written, rejoice, O barren one, who does not bear.
Losing the
Break forth
Alexandra.
and cry aloud, you who are not in labor. For the children of the desolate one will more than those of the one who has a husband.
All right, can somebody read verse 27 again?
For it is written, rejoice,
Did I
barren
do
woman,
something wrong?
who does not
Alexandra,
break
we've lost
forth.
you.
It does not break forth and shout, you who are in labor. For more are the children of the desolation than the one who has a husband.
All right, this is a lot, right? Okay, so let's break this down. So why would he compare the favored son, the son, why would he compare them to descendants of Hagar, right?
Hey, Michael, we
And-
just read verse 21. I think you were out. What's it, 20 and 21? We're on 20 and 21. Okay, go on, Robert.
Okay, so why is he doing this midrash here? Because this is a classic midrash, okay? Why is he doing a midrash of Hagar and Sarah? And it kind of tells me what time of the year he's doing this, by the way. It's probably sometime at the end of November, December, probably in December, he's doing in our calendar, he's doing this Torah portion study. So anyway, why do you think he's taken these 2 different views of Hagar and Sarah? Let's get your guys' opinion first.
We said it was like an allegory, or that's a word they use in mine. What is that word allegorical in Hebrew? That's verse, you read 24.
Well, obviously, when he's talking about the facts don't merit, obviously the descendants of Hagar produce Ishmael, and Ishmael produces 12 kings who were in the Arab Peninsula. So clearly the Jewish people are not descendants of Ishmael. Okay, that's clear. So it has to be allegorical. Okay. So, but why choose Hagar as the comparison between Sarah and Hagar? Why choose this? This is my question.
Well, is it because one is born, the son of the slave was born according to the flesh, while the son of the free woman was born through promise? So essentially Hagar and Ishmael were, that was Abraham trying to work it out on his own. It's essentially man's attempts to become righteous in the sight of God, or to fulfill God's promise without waiting on God to do it for himself.
Okay, yeah. And what, in essence, what is the circumcision party trying to teach? To work it out on your own by the flesh, right? You're not operating in the spirit, you're operating in the flesh. You're teaching that the flesh is preeminent. You start with the flesh and then the spirit comes later, right? And that's what the circumcision party is saying is part of covenant or salvation. So clearly that you nailed it. I think that's exactly right. So to start in that principle, then you take 2 camps. So what you're doing is he's talking about everybody in covenant, all 12 tribes and those grafting in. He's basically saying, these are your 2 choices. You can live by the flesh, struggling and grinding to keep these laws and do it every day and be slave to that, or you can have the Spirit of God in you and he can free you of that grind and give you that promise that was always waiting for you. It was going to happen. You just had to wait it out till the time it comes in your life. And that happens. I mean, how many times in everybody here on this call's life where God has asked you to wait something out and you fight it, you're grinding inside. You do not want to wait it out, but God is asking you to do it. And when you try to do it on your own, it just gets super chaotic. And so that's
Amen.
the allegory he's talking about. Because if you're doing it according to his promise, you're going to have freedom. It's going to work out so well. But when you're trying to do it yourself, it grinds to a stop. I mean, you may have some good days, but most of them will be bad days. So, for it is written, rejoice, O barren one who does not bear. Break forth and cry aloud, you who are not in labor, for the children of the desolate one will be more than the one who has a husband. Huh. So what is he saying there?
Sarah's children there were more of Sarah's children than there were of Hagar.
Yeah.
She was the desolate one. And yeah, I don't know the concept of who has a husband, but Sarah
had the husband. It was her husband. The other one was what would be defined in the sense as a concubine. She has to produce. She's there instead to produce an heir in the flesh because the promise hadn't kicked in, right? So, all right, now let's read. Who has not read yet? All right, I'm going to bring this last part. What's that? Oh, you have it. Okay, Tyler, go ahead and finish up the chapter.
Now you, brothers, like Isaac, are children of promise. But just as at that time he who was born according to the flesh persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, so also it is now. But what does the scripture say? Cast out the slave woman and her son, for the son of the slave woman shall not inherit with the son of the free woman. So, brothers, we are not children of the slave, but of the free woman.
Yeah, that is the essence of that if you're going to get the promise, you're going to get the inheritance, you have to be a son of Isaac. That is the only way into the kingdom. If not, and quite frankly, if you're an Ishmaelite, you're descendant of Hagar, or you're still grinding it out in the law, the only way you're going to get it is through Messiah and son of promise come through Isaac. And Isaac was a type and shadow of Yeshua. So if you look at the life of Isaac, he shadowed the way Messiah would be. He never left the land. He was a product of the inheritance. And so historically, it's interesting that one of the names that the Galatians called themselves is the Saka. That was one of the names that they called themselves. And so it's interesting that they would really appreciate and understand the fact that their name, Isaac, was placed on them in the beginning. Most of you may not know that it's so, but when they migrated into Europe, when Phrygia and the Galatians migrated into Europe, they come under that name, that banner. So it's interesting that Paul knew something. It's not relevant to get to these brothers' souls, but it's relevant to a bigger picture that they were descendants of Isaac, and many of them may have not even known it. So
I think that question of the children of promise is important, because what is the promise? And the promise is that I will make you a great nation. Why? Because you had faith, because your faith was demonstrated by your willingness to sacrifice Isaac. You were faithfully obedient.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly right.
Well,
All right.
and Robert, that also speaks to the fact that what we started with, that these people in that area were actually, and he was, the majority of them were descendants of the 12 tribes or the 10 tribes that were scattered, because even though they weren't practicing it, somewhere in their legend, their history, they knew what he's talking about here.
Yeah, they did.
But for us, we're battling to really understand it.
That's
but
exactly
he would
right.
use that example for those people if they hadn't had some kind of background with being descendants of Abraham.
That's exactly right. That it's a lot clearer to them. I mean, it's funny. If just south of this Galatia and Phrygia, just south of it, there's a province in Syria called Hasaka, which means in Hebrew means the Saka, or the people of Isaac. That name, that name Saka, that actually was a city in during the time of Hezekiah that was renamed in Israel called the Saka. So the name of Isaac was placed on the descendants of Joseph. So he said in 48:20 that my name, my father Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, our name Israel will be upon you, right? So when they went into exile, they carried the name. They lost Israel, but they carried the name of Isaac with them, which is super interesting. So
What part of the land, what part of the world is Galatia now, Robert? Refresh my memory.
Phrygia and Galatia are completely part of Turkey today.
Okay.
Yeah. So in about around 200 AD, 215 AD, the Romans marched out. It was actually 211. The Romans marched out to fight a war against Parthia, and they fought in the heart of Phrygia and Galatia. That's where the war took place, because they came out against each other. The battle was so severe, there was literally hundreds of thousands on both sides that died. It was a stalemate, kind of like this Ukraine-Russia war. Very similar, right? It was a stalemate, but it weakened Parthia so much that the present-day Iranian people were a small province. They rebelled against the entire empire. The Parthian Empire overthrew it and caused a mass exodus of people up from Phrygia and north into the Georgia, Armenia, up into the Caucasus and north, and they would travel west, right? So there was something that would happen about 150, 180 years later that would affect these people dramatically and change their life forever. And so that's where you find the descendants of Phrygia were Franks. That's where you get the Franks in France. And the Galatians followed behind them along with them. So they confederated together. But this is a very interesting aspect of this area, and why this, because of all the books that Paul writes, they're in the Roman Empire. This one is not in the Roman Empire. It's not part of Rome. And so that makes it very unique. So
that's why back in Acts, he mentioned I was supposed to go here. I wasn't forbidden to go here, but I'm here because I'm sick and I have to be here now.
yes.
I had a plan for him there.
Yeah, and Rome and Parthia would fight over this it would go back and forth. Parthia would control it for a while, then Rome would control it. Then they would be free for a long time. Then Rome would come back in, and there's a constant back and forth. They were kind of in a no man's land. They always got invaded. They didn't have natural barriers, natural protection. So it was difficult for these people. They would, but according to farmland, as far as agriculturally, it's the breadbasket of Turkey. So that's why it's coveted by the Turks. Anyway. That's the long short. So let's go ahead and stop the recording. Okay, yes.